Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about Honduras. Honduras is based in Central America and is located alongside El Salvador. And if you've been following the channel, you'll know that I recently posted a video on the largest prison in the world, which has been built in El Salvador by the President Nayib Bukele to house gang members because there is a massive gang problem in El Salvador. And unfortunately, Honduras also has a huge gang problem. And the President of Honduras has also waged a war against these gangs. And as a result of this crackdown, there was a riot at a women's prison recently when 46 inmates died. And as a direct result of that, the president has now put the prisons under military control. And as the El Salvador prison video I posted was so popular, I thought it would be interesting to do a similar video on what's happening in Honduras. So in today's episode, I'll give you a brief overview of Honduras. We'll look at the gang problem in the country, what happened in the recent prison riot, what's going on with regards to the military takeover, and then finally today I'll wrap up with my summary as to what I think is likely to happen over the course of the next 3 to 6 months. Honduras is located in Central America, situated between Guatemala and El Salvador to the west, and Nicaragua to the south and the east. The country has 2 coastlines on the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean, has a population of around 10.5 million people, and its capital is Tegucigalpa. More than 3/4 of the land of Honduras is mountainous, and there are various active volcanoes in the region. The climate is generally hot with high humidity, and the country is susceptible to long dry spells and drought. The official language of Honduras is Spanish, and the predominant religion is Roman Catholicism, directly as a result of the fact that Honduras was formerly a Spanish colony. Honduras does not have a wealth of natural resources, and in fact its largest natural resource is its agricultural land, which is one of the biggest employers, employing around 20% of all people. However, the GDP generated by agriculture is less than 10% as a result of the fact that a lot of people are involved in subsistence farming, so basically growing enough food to be able to eat themselves. As a result of its location in Central America, Mexican drug cartels have used the country as a transit point, and in the early 2010s, Honduras was afflicted with one of the world's highest per capita homicide rates, as violent gang-related crime reached epidemic proportions. As a result of the ongoing gang warfare and the high crime rate, there has been a mass exodus from Honduras over the course of the last 15 years. And hundreds of thousands of Hondurans attempt to cross the border into the USA every single year. As a result of the strong influence of the drug cartels and the gangs, there have been long-standing accusations of corruption and bribery against the presidents of Honduras. And in February 2022, the previous president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, lost his campaign for a 3rd re-election and was replaced by Xiomara Castro, who became Honduras' first female president. 3 weeks after the former President Hernandez left office, Honduran officials responded to a US request for his extradition by arresting him at his home, and he faced charges of colluding with drug cartels to facilitate the transportation of hundreds of tons of cocaine from Colombia and Venezuela to the USA via Honduras in return for millions of dollars that he used to fund his political rise. In November 2022, President Castro declared a state of emergency regarding gang violence in the country and announced that some constitutional rights would be suspended in the capital city and the city of San Pedro Sula to crack down on criminal gangs in those 2 cities, particularly the Mara Salvatrucha and 18th Street gangs. The gangs were accused of extorting residents in exchange for protection from violence and of killing people who refused to pay. And it was estimated that the gangs had earned over $737 million through extortion. The Commissioner of the National Police announced that the crackdown on gangs would carry repressive actions and would penetrate the gangs to capture their leaders.
According to reports, a brawl had broken out between rival gangs in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Investigators say most of those killed were burned to death, with the remainder either shot or stabbed. 7 women were rushed to hospital with gunshot and knife wounds as authorities worked to identify the mass of bodies. Earlier this year, the Honduran government formed a commission aiming to retake control of prisons run by gangs and crooked officials. The Honduran president insists inmates had planned the riot with the knowledge of guards and promised drastic action as a result.
The Honduran people must know we will not allow any efforts against organised crime to be sabotaged. Organised crime has hijacked our country's penitentiary system. It's trying to cause fear and failure among authorities, but we will not give in.
A government declaring war on gangs driven by power.
President Castro said the riot had been planned by gang members with guards' knowledge. "I'll take drastic measures," she said on Twitter. Castro's first move late Tuesday was to replace the security minister with the head of the national police. The head of the country's penal system said the riot was likely in reaction to a government crackdown in recent months on corruption within prisons. Honduras has a history of deadly prison incidents. A prison gang fight in 2019 killed 18 inmates, and over 350 were killed at a fire at a prison in 2012.
Honduras's military began taking control of the country's violent prisons on Monday, according to officials. The move comes after a gang dispute left 46 inmates dead at a women's detention center last week. The high-security Tamara prison shown here is one of 2 that military police now control. Colonel Fernando Munoz told reporters that the weapons and ammo shown here were seized from only one area in the prison controlled by the Barrio 18 gang and accounted for only 5% of total inspections. Although the official capacity of the prison is 2,500, more than 4,200 people are crammed into this facility. A United Nations report said that the country's 26 prisons are around 34% over capacity. Some on the streets of the capital told Reuters the military control doesn't go far enough to stop the violence.
I think that the new measures have to be put in place. First of all, the prisons have to be restructured. New jails have to be built. Also, to train and educate the staff working in the prisons, and a new army, because the police and the army are complicit in this violence.
The takeover is part of a push by leftist President Castro to eliminate organized crime inside prisons, and a departure from her previous stance of demilitarization. The images resemble those from El Salvador earlier this year, where the government has beefed up prison security and locked up more than 62,000 alleged criminals in a crackdown on gangs.
Major gang violence in Honduras can be traced back to the 1970s, but severe issues of violence escalated significantly in the early 2000s with the emergence of major gangs, which rose in prominence following an increase in the deportation of criminals back to Honduras, predominantly from the USA. This deportation largely occurred after 1996, when the USA passed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act, which expedited the deportation process for those convicted of aggravated felonies. It's now estimated that there are more than 40,000 active gang members in Honduras, with the 2 most powerful gangs being the Mara Salvatrucha and Barrio 18. However, other gangs have emerged as offshoots or challengers to these 2 major gangs. Groups like Chirazos, Los Fatas Locos, Los Tercerenosos, La Ponce, and Los Alanchino have all gained prominence in Honduras, typically focusing on more local businesses and further drawing territorial boundaries. These gangs use violence and threats to enforce their power. Members of the community who do not pay their war taxes to the gangs for protection are threatened and often killed simply for their disobedience. It is partly due to the gang culture in Honduras that many people have risked illegal immigration to the USA. Honduras is considered a major drug route to the USA. Smuggling is said to have increased after the US suspended anti-drug support following the 2009 Honduran coup d'etat. Weak domestic law enforcement institutions makes Honduras a popular point of entry for drug routes through Central America, and it's estimated that around 80% of all cocaine routes originating in South America use Honduras as a central landing point. Once the drugs arrive in Honduras, major Honduran smuggling gangs assist the transfer of drugs into Mexico and the USA. Many of these gangs are assisted by Mexican cartels, who've gained increasing influence in Honduras and Central America following the Mexican drug war, which attempted to limit cartel activity in Mexico itself. A prominent factor behind the prevalence of drug trade in Honduras is corruption throughout the country across a variety of police forces and political positions. Crime in Honduras has become a growing matter of concern for Honduran population in recent years. Honduras has experienced alarmingly high levels of violence and criminal activity, with homicide rates often as high as 20 per day. Corruption, extortion, coercion and drug smuggling are rampant through Honduran society, preventing the nation from building trustworthy authorities like police and severely limiting economic, social or political progress. High murder rates have long plagued Honduras, which has been routinely classified as one of the most dangerous countries in the world. Latin America has around 8% of the world's population, however it accounts for around 37% of the world's homicides. And Honduras has a homicide rate around 18 times higher than the USA. Many perpetrators of these crimes are young men aged between 15 and 34 who are typically members of gangs. The majority of murders in Honduras go unpunished, and if prosecutions occur at all, they typically involve only low-level gang members. And it's estimated that over the last 10 years, only around 4% of all homicides have ended in conviction. Another issue that Honduras confronts as a result of gang violence and a high homicide rate is the murder of youths. And Honduras has the highest youth homicide rate in the world. As a result of organised crime, gang activity and high rates of violence, boys born in Honduras experience a 1 in 9 chance of being murdered. Homicides resulting from gang violence have been noted as a significant factor behind the rise in youth migration out of the country over the last 10 years. As part of the ongoing war against gangs in the country, President Castro recently announced that curfews would be imposed in 2 major cities after more than 20 people were killed in separate attacks, amid escalating violence in the country. Heavily armed gang members opened fire in a billiards hall in a neighbourhood in the northern manufacturing city of Chamala, killing 13 people and seriously wounding another. In addition to these murders, the Honduran police reported that at least another 11 murders had taken place on the same night in separate episodes across the northern Valdesula zone, including the industrial city of San Pedro Sula. President Castro announced a 15-day curfew in Comala between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. and another in San Pedro Sula. Multiple operations, raids, captures and checkpoints are initiated, she said on Twitter. Security Minister Gustavo Sanchez announced that the government would be sending a proposal to Congress to classify members of a criminal structure, maras and gangs as terrorists. He also announced that an additional 1,000 police and military personnel were being sent to the area. The Honduras government is also offering cash rewards of over $32,000 to help identify and capture those responsible for the killings. One of Honduras' leading anti-corruption advocates has announced that she's left the South American country because of threats, weeks after accusing President Castro's government of nepotism. Gabriela Castellanos, executive director of the National Anti-Corruption Council, which has investigated public corruption in Honduras for nearly a decade, recently left the country with their family and travelled to the USA. Given the situation of insecurity facing my family and myself, we decided to leave the country and hope these events that have occurred in recent weeks can be investigated, she said in a recent TV interview. She did not specify where the threats had come from or what investigation they were related to, but said that they began over the course of the last few weeks. On May the 24th, the CNA published the results of an investigation alleging that the Honduran government tapped Castro's relatives for positions in the presidency, the cabinet, Congress and the Supreme Court. President Castro denied the claims the next day and described them as false, accusing the CNA of keeping silent during corruption in the government of former President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was extradited to the USA on drug trafficking charges in 2022. Gerardo Torres, Castro's deputy foreign minister, said the threats against Castellanos were not coming from within the government. I hope we can figure out where they're coming from and that Ms. Castellanos can come back to the country, he said in a press conference. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because the video that I posted on El Salvador's prison system and the crackdown on gangs received a lot of positive commentary and feedback, and it's had a lot of views. So I thought it'd be interesting to have a look at what's going on in neighbouring Honduras. And Honduras is suffering from exactly the same problems as El Salvador, partly as a result of the US crackdown on gangs, where a lot of people are expelled from the country and sent back to their native homeland, and partly as a result of the fact that drug cartels from both South America and Mexico use the Central American countries as their landing point to load up all of the guys who are then going to try and smuggle drugs across into the USA. Honduras is suffering from a major gang epidemic. And as we've seen in today's video, it has some of the highest homicide rates and death rates in the world. And because these gangs have grown so large and have become so threatening and extortionate, nobody wants to speak up against them. And over the course of the last 15 to 20 years, there have been accusations of corruption right through the whole of Honduras society, including the president, who was recently arrested and extradited to the USA and is going to face charges of corruption, bribery, and assisting the drug cartels. Now, one of the problems that Honduras has is that it's a poor country. It doesn't have any natural resources. It's a net importer. And as we've talked about a lot on the channel, net importers have had a hard time over the course of the last couple of years because they're importing things like oil and gas and food, and the price of all of those commodities has risen dramatically, and that's put financial strain onto a lot of budgets. The main natural resource that Honduras has is its agricultural land, but unfortunately it hasn't commercialised that land. It's not exporting large quantities of what it's growing. A lot of it is being used by the people to feed their families. So when you have a situation like this, it means that the economy becomes very fragile. And as a result of that, Honduras needs external assistance. Now, normally when we're talking about external assistance, I'd be talking about the IMF and the World Bank and other aid agencies. These bodies tend to be the lender of last resorts for economies like Honduras. However, the difference in Central America is that there's another option. The drug cartels who are producing cocaine have lots of cash, and those organisations want to use Honduras as the landing point to move all of the cocaine closer to the USA and then work out a strategy for taking it over the border. And that's what's been happening in the country over the course of the last 30 years or so. And as a result of that, we've seen the influence and the number of Mexican drug cartels and gangs grow over that period. And we've now got to a situation where it's very difficult to be able to change this balance. Now, the new president that came in 2022 has decided to follow the same route as Nayib Bukele in El Salvador and have a major crackdown on gangs. She is trying to break this gang culture and to arrest all of these members. And as we've seen in today's video, as a direct result of this crackdown, there was a riot at a women's prison recently where 46 inmates died. And as you saw from the footage, the guns and the weapons and the ammunition that was recovered from just a very small part of that prison were completely terrifying in terms of the amount of weapons and the caliber of those weapons. The prisoners basically had an arsenal of weapons. So there was clearly no security, nobody doing any checks, nobody wanting to go into cells and turn them upside down to try and see if there were any concealed weapons, because clearly there were lots of concealed weapons all over the place. Now, in order to try and change this situation, President Castro has now announced that the military will be taking over running all of the prisons. So the existing prison guards will be replaced by army personnel. And the hope, therefore, is that the corruption will end and that the military will be able to manage the prisons and remove all of the weapons and reduce the gang culture. Now, one of the problems that Honduras is facing here is that it's in a war. We've spoken a lot about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is an actual war between two countries. But what we've got in Honduras is a war between the drug cartels and the authorities. And the problem that Honduras has is that there are lots of people on the drug cartel side. There are 40,000 active gang members who are all representing the cartels. And the problem that Honduras has is that the cartels have lots of money and therefore access to weapons. And because the gangs have such a fearsome reputation and there is a high homicide rate, people in Honduras are terrified. They don't want to speak up against the gangs. They don't want to be testifying against them. And as we saw from earlier in the video, the conviction rate for homicides is less than 5% in Honduras. So that means that over 95% of all homicides go uninvestigated and there are no convictions. So basically, we've got a lawless society. These gangs can do what they like because nobody's going to do anything about it. Now, President Castro has come out and stated that she wants to break these gangs. There is now a crackdown on the gang culture. But the problem with this is going to be enforcing it. How do you go about arresting 40,000 people? As we saw from the video earlier, the prisons in Honduras are already overcrowded. They've got far more people in them than they were originally designed to hold. Now, as you may have seen in the video I posted on El Salvador, President Bukele has built the largest prison in the world, and it is dedicated to gang members. He's going to stuff that prison with 40,000 gang members from El Salvador. So really, from Honduras' point of view, they need to do the same. But who's going to pay for it? Certainly not the drug cartels. They won't be supporting the removal of gang members from the streets because they want those gang members to continue helping them with their drug trafficking. So Honduras will need to find the money from elsewhere, and the big question is who will fund it, because building massive purpose-built prisons isn't really in the remit of the IMF or the World Bank. They're more focused on providing food to people who need it. So as it stands at the moment, President Castro's mission is highly commendable. It looks fantastic. It's great that there is actually some sort of pushback against the gang warfare and the culture, and they're now having crackdowns and trying to stop all of the homicides. But when you've got an army of 40,000 gang members being supported and financed by drug cartels, that war is going to be very difficult to win. So as I said right at the start of this video, I wanted to post this episode really to give you an update on what's going on in Honduras. We've had a little look at Honduras in terms of where it's located and the bigger picture on its economy. We haven't done a deep dive into any of the financials, really because there aren't a lot to look into. The bigger issue here is what's going on in terms of the people of Honduras. The gangs have taken over some of the major cities. They're being used to help the drug trade move its product from South America into the USA. And unfortunately, from Honduras' point of view, this has been going on for a very long period of time, and it's going to be a massive task to break down that gang culture, to get those people into prisons, needing to build more prisons to be able to accommodate that, and to stop all of these homicides. So this crackdown on gang warfare, on the takeover of prisons, has only been going on for the last 6 months or so, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens over the course of the next 3 to 6 months. Whether we start to see the balance of power shifting in favour of the Honduras authorities, or if the gangs win back their territory. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments as and when they break. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I said, please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.